Welcome to the Weather Gurus podcast update for Hurricane Ian. Yes, it is back a hurricane, but the good news is that it has picked up speed. It's moving northeast at 10 miles an hour off the coast of Florida, the east coast of Florida now. Want to recap Hurricane Ian, its first landfall, really briefly before we get into the additional landfall that's coming up somewhere in the Carolinas here as of tomorrow afternoon, Friday afternoon, Eastern time. So let's recap. Hurricane Ian did make landfall as a Category 4 storm in the exact same place Hurricane Charlie did in 2004. If some of you guys remember that, ladies and gentlemen, remember that. In 2004, Florida was traversed by 4 hurricanes: Charlie, Francis, Ivan, and Gene. Hurricane Charlie hit in the same spot, which was the Port Charlotte Harbor area, off one of the Berry Islands there called Cayo Costa. It's really Sanibel Island there. Same spot. But there's some differences with the tracks of there's some differences in terms of the size. Obviously Charlie was smaller. Hurricane Charlie was smaller than Hurricane Ian. Hurricane Ian had a bigger wind field, and obviously the storm surge. Hurricane Charlie was a wind event in most places. The surge in Hurricane Ian was significantly higher, and that's what we're going to talk about as well. But let me give you the latest coordinates and updates here from the National Hurricane Center, courtesy of the National Hurricane Center. It's about 240 miles or 390 kilometers south of Charleston, South Carolina, or about 335 miles south-southwest of Cape Fear, North Carolina. Maximum sustained winds are at 75 miles an hour. And like I said, it's moving northeast at 10. It was 9 miles per hour overnight and passing through the Orlando area. Minimum central pressure is up to 986 millibars. 986 millibars or 29.12 inches of mercury. Now, what was crazy about this is that the tropical storm force winds of this system now extend out over, let me see here. I want to get it right. Yep. Tropical storm force winds extend out over 415 miles. Okay. That's unbelievable for tropical storm force winds. What a big wind field the whole system is. Hurricane force winds extend out 45 miles. So that has remained constant throughout the life of this storm. The hurricane force winds extending out 45 miles on either side. Tropical storm force winds, the wind field of tropical storm force winds extended 415 miles when it made landfall and back in the Fort Myers area, North Fort Myers Beach, Fort Myers area. The wind field it basically doubled because tropical storm winds were out almost 200 miles. Now it's doubled as it's crossed over to the Atlantic basin. A couple of key features here. I'm going to do a quick analysis for you of the satellite presentation of it. What happened is the steering currents for Hurricane Ian is being steered by this cold front, this cold front basically that became stationary, became hung up. Most of the time in October and this time of year, we're heading into October, when we have a hurricane like this track is not uncommon for it to track across Florida, but usually it's a faster moving storm and it turns to the northeast and it's out in one day. Like it makes landfall on the west coast of Florida somewhere along, and it quickly accelerates, being picked up by these cold fronts. But the cold front has stalled. It was stationary the whole time, and this created a very difficult forecasting situation. Usually, and that thing too, usually when you have cold fronts and warm fronts, it brings showers, right? Thunderstorms and showers, and induces those showers before the actual front passes through. This time, since the front hung up, those showers were induced in addition to the rainfall amounts from Hurricane Ian, so it doubled the problem. And that created rainfall amounts in Orlando and places like that over a foot, 12 inches, 13 inches, and that created some flooding in the typical areas along I-4 north of Orlando in the suburbs, Altamont Springs, Apopka, heading towards Seminole and Volusia County, Daytona Beach, as well as those areas in Orlando that flood anyway, like under I-4 near Ivanhoe Boulevard, the 408 Expressway. But they did have to close down the Florida Turnpike coming through Orlando after you pass the Colonial Drive exit. Because there's some low-lying swampy areas there that got flooded out too. So in the Orlando International Airport as well, the roads going into the airport along the Beeline Expressway, the 528 toll, for those of you who know, and the access roads going into the airport were flooded. So we don't know how soon that's going to be, the water's going to recede there. But the airport operations hope to get it up by Saturday, etc. So definitely contact your airlines if you're flying out of MCO or Orlando International Airport. So back to the storm. Now, guys, I want to give you an analysis of what the storm looks like now. The eye is over the water, the open Atlantic, east of Daytona Beach and Melbourne Beach and the Cape Canaveral area here as it pulls away to the northeast. It's interesting to note that the composition of the storm has really turned extra tropical, really, but we're not gonna get into semantics. So it's really became like a cold core or a cool core low type of system right now, and not a warm core, as the cloud tops have warmed in the center, and the center has become exposed. It's not have that tight eye wall that we've seen, that dynamic stadium effect, and obviously it doesn't, because it went down, it weakened from becoming a category 4 to a 1 now. But and most of the convection is to the north and east. That has not changed throughout the life of this system, except that landfall point where it expanded before landfall, and it had a tight eye wall and a big 40-mile eye with a eye wall replacement cycle and everything completed around. But on the eastern side of Florida, we have a system now with not much convection on the south side and southwest and southeast side, so that's a good thing. And we kind of have an open eye, an exposed eye, at least on the infrared brightness satellite here. So that is a good thing. Now, one of the things to note too is the front has passed through. The cold front has passed through, and it's basically hung up along the Jacksonville coastline and the Georgia coastline, all the way up through the Mid-Atlantic, etc. Because we have red flag warnings for Pensacola, Mobile, Biloxi, and up through Birmingham, Alabama. This is because the dry air has already filtered in through most of the northern Gulf of Mexico and all the way out, and that's visible. That's made visible on the satellite, on the water vapor here. If we turn to the water vapor here, and we can see the dry air. See all these dark lines here? The dark lines on the water vapor is either represented by orange color or a dark gray color. That represents dry air. Now, Ian is in an environment where there's dry air. It's surrounded by dry air that's pushing up against it and against this cold front here. And as it makes its way north, what can we expect? Well, we can expect there's going to be a slight storm surge, as the winds are going to be coming in from the south east into the coastline of Georgia, the Sea Isles from Brunswick all the way up through Savannah, Hilton Head, Columbia, the Low Country, South Carolina, Holly Hill, Charleston, Kiowa Island, Folly Beach. All of that is going to be experiencing a storm surge in the beginning. So the storm surge may be anywhere on the order from 3 to 5 feet. And then it's going to lessen as the winds become offshore, as Hurricane Ian moves up along the coast and makes landfall. The winds will switch directions and come from the northwest, offshore wind, and so the blow out the water. So there will be no longer a storm surge, and it'll just be a rain event. And most of the rain here is supposed to be limited. We're not quite sure how much rain it's in, but right now the thinking is the rain is going to be about 5 to 8 inches. It's not going to be as much as Florida, where you got 12 to 18 inches on the stripe along the I-4 corridor from I-4 Tampa, Orlando, Daytona Beach, and areas south, and Sebring and all of that, Avon Park. It's not going to be as much rain as that. However, it is going to be a significant amount, considering this area haven't seen that much rain before. So between 5 to 8 inches of rain inland from Columbia, South Carolina, Augusta, Georgia, into Charlotte, the Piedmont, up through upstate South Carolina, Greenville, Spartanburg, and into Asheville, North Carolina, and the mountains of the mountains of North Carolina there. And because of the elevation, they may experience some orographic lifting, some squeezing out of the rain there, and so they may get some maximum totals there of 9 to 10 inches of rain in the mountains of North Carolina and in the upstate there. But we'll have to wait and see of what's left, because right now the convection is not as strong as it has been. The thunderstorms are not towering, they're not blossoming here on the water vapor and everything as we've seen before, and it looks a little disjointed. So the system is fighting some dry air associated with the cold front, having already passed through the I-10 corridor, meaning Tallahassee, Lake City, and on through Jacksonville, just about here. And so since it's merged here, system is kind of merged into the front here. It's fighting some dry air and circulation problems. So it is a hurricane, no doubt, a category 1, but the difference between 70 and 70 miles an hour wind and 75 mile an hour wind is not that much. So I think the coastline of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina can handle that, because once it goes in, it's going to rapidly weaken to a depression, and also and continue on. It'll just be a tropical rainstorm by then. So I think they'll be okay with that, most of the areas there. But like I said, be careful for the flooding and the things in those areas, especially along I-95, those areas in Lumberton, North Carolina, Wilmington, Cape Fear. The rivers down there, as you know, it doesn't take much to flood those areas, and the upstate and Midlands areas of South Carolina could flood out too, with localized street flooding and all of that. So just be careful, because Hurricane Ian's continuously surprised us with its track and forecast track to the right of the cone, and also with all of the rainfall that's just imagined to get, and the convection, despite the dry air that's being entrained against backed up against the system here to the west of it. So it's interesting to see that squeeze play there. Now, guys, I want to talk to you about the area where we saw the most storm surge here. According to Google Maps here, the most storm surge came into Captiva Island, which is an island off the coast of Fort Myers, Florida. We have the Charlotte Harbor Inland Harbor here. We have the Charlotte Harbor Bay here. And outside the Charlotte Harbor Bay, we have these barrier islands out here. Fort Myers Beach, like Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel Island, and Captiva Island. These areas experienced storm surge on the order, somewhere of the order of 14 to 16 feet, that it knocked out the Causeway Bridge, the Sanibel Causeway Bridge, the toll road that connects them to the mainland of Fort Myers. And because of which, this is going to take months to repair. And the governor has already spoken about that. Governor DeSantis was down there, Ron DeSantis of Florida. We have 23 million people in Florida, 22 million people, and we get 20 million visitors. And a lot of visitors come down here to this southwest portion to vacation. Snowbirds from New York, New Jersey, Maine, the DC area, they come down here to Fort Myers, Sanibel Island, Naples, and those areas to vacation, and also just have, a summer vacation home or a timeshare down there. Well, this area is flooded. Fort Myers experienced about a storm surge topping 10 feet. That's a record for them, between 8 to 10 feet. Naples experienced a storm surge, a record for them, around 8 feet. And areas south of there, Key West even experienced a storm surge, which was high for them, and the storm was like 150 miles to the west of them as it passed them. They experienced a storm surge above 3 feet, 3.5 feet. So we had, and the storm surge was highest there. As a result, because the winds were coming in off the bay like this, coming in in a southwesterly direction, pumping that water in through these inlets here. And as you know, Fort Myers and Cape Coral are separated by the Coosawashee River, and the Coosawashee River water became in there, and it flooded, and it compounded the effect because the city's built on the river. The water pumps up, the storm surge came up through the river, and it just compounded the effect, and that created a huge amount of storm surge. And Fort Myers Beach was absolutely destroyed. They had a 12-foot storm surge out there, or more, 12-foot plus. We don't know the official numbers until after the damage survey teams that have that for us coming up in the week here. So Sanibel Island, Fort Myers Beach, Captiva Island, these areas, Pine Island, they experienced storm surge over 12 feet, guaranteed. Most likely it was on the order of 15 to 16 feet, really. And that's what came in during the height of the storm after the eye passed and all of that nature there. So that's what we had. Now, in the Tampa area, I want to mention the Tampa Bay area, they were blessed to not have that. Tampa Bay, they had an out tide because the winds were coming in from the northeast. So that was pushing the water out of Tampa Bay and out of old Tampa Bay and out to sea. So they experienced an out tide, a negative storm surge that you might have seen on TV in the reports because of that. And the winds never did switch back around the direction that most people thought. It never did switch back around to the northwest to push any water. So they didn't get any storm surge or minimum water rise either. They might have got a foot water rise at all. But the winds were gusty, around 60 miles an hour. Orlando had a gust of 70 miles an hour, but nobody had sustained winds at hurricane force like they did with Hurricane Charlie as a Cat 1. So it came through. Ian is different that way. It came through more of a tropical storm. Orlando had winds sustained around 40 to 50, and some gusts occasionally got around 70 or 80. The highest gust was in Daytona Beach. They had a 98 mile an hour gust and stuff like that. But really, guys, all in all, the power outage situation looks great from Tampa to Orlando. Most of them have underground utilities, underground power, so they look great. Only a few communities lost power in Orlando and the Tampa area, mostly due to trees down. And because they lost power, because trees were down, they turned off the power so they can get the trees. And, and some streets were flooded, so they had to turn off the power. Some power companies chose to turn off the power there because, when the streets is flooded, you don't want kids or anybody outside playing around who, just want to see what happens. So the flooding was an issue in Kissimmee in Orlando. Like I said, Kissimmee is about 25-30 minutes south of Orlando. There was flooding around Highway 192 and along the lakefront there. Kissimmee's bordered by a lake here, as I'm showing you on Google Maps here, big lake, top Lake Toho, and there was some flooding there, of course, and flooding in the downtown area as well. And Orlando's surrounded by lakes, and there was some flooding on the turnpike that closed the turnpike down, and I-4 down. There was a flooding on I-4, like I said, Ivanhoe Boulevard exit north Orlando, and there's some flooding in South Orlando off of I-4. Somewhere below the John Young Parkway exit. So that's what was going on, guys, in the Orlando area. So this is just a brief recap of Hurricane Ian. Once again, it's heading toward the Carolinas for its second landfall. And we can't forget about Cuba, because Western Cuba had that landfall on Pinar del Rio as a Category 3. So it really is going to make this will be its really third landfall technically. So because Cuba also experienced that, and Cuba's getting power back online. It damaged a lot of the tobacco farms there in western Cuba. I heard reports were telling us on AccuWeather, but they're getting their power back online. I believe about 50 or 60% of people now are back online with power in Cuba, the nation, the island nation of Cuba. So my prayers with everyone. This was going to be the storm of the month, Hurricane Ian, and most likely the name could possibly be retired. If there's and one other thing too is that we don't know how many fatalities or deaths were on those people on the island here. That some people chose to stay behind. As you know, there were mandatory evacuations, but some people chose to stay behind on Sanibel Island and on this Captiva Island and on Pine Island, even though there were mandatory evacuations. So we don't know if there's any fatalities. We'll find that out in the next 2 weeks. Search and rescue teams have been coming in from Miami-Dade Fire Rescue and all the special Cajun Navy groups, all the groups that are trained in water rescues are out there, and they'll let us know. But so far, so good. We haven't had any reports of fatalities or deaths related to storm surge yet, so that's excellent news. Everybody heeded the evacuations for the most part, got on I-75, got on I-4, and got at least away from the coast and into with family members or into hotels or wherever the situation warranted. So that's an excellent thing. With this storm, and we only had that couple of one tornadoes over here on the east side too, as well. As a matter of fact, we had that report. I think it was out of Broward County. It was an EF1 or EF0 that did some damage to planes and tossed some planes, some Cessna planes type planes and stuff like that. But we didn't have a whole lot of tornado outbreak too last night from the I-4 corridor as it made its way through Sebring, Orlando, Lakeland, and up through Sanford, Altamont Springs, Daytona Beach, the I-4 corridor, and on through Palm Coast and out back out to sea. So that was great news. We didn't have much of a tornado threat this morning either. So that's great news. Now this next landfall, I'm not sure about coming up here in the Carolinas. We're not sure about if they have a heavy tornado threat. Please check the SPC, the Storm Prediction Center, for that. But so far so good. We're blessed in that sense, even though it's much destruction from the water storm. But we're blessed that it wasn't so far that many fatalities or anything like that. And people heeded the warnings for mandatory evacuations off the west coast of Florida, from Tampa southward, basically. So that's a great thing. Thank you for joining me on this 5 o'clock update on Hurricane Ian. I will bring you more updates later on tomorrow as we warranty and closer to the weekend and as things become more clear. And as well as talk about other things other than the tropics and more educational topics here we hope to talk about as far as how hurricanes form and not just hurricane season, but also other things that may be happening in the lower 48 United States as well as internationally as well. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you. Be pleased to subscribe to this channel, The Weather Guru. Tell your friends and family as well. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.